Hey guys, Arleesha here, and welcome to another video. Today I want to talk to you about these really special watercolors, and they're special for a lot of reasons, but let me just start from the beginning. These are by Peerless Watercolors, and as you can see, they're not your standard tube paints or half pans. These are watercolor sheets, which means that the paint has been dried in very thin sheets on the back of these papers. The sides that I'm showing to you now is actually just the color side, so it's not actually the paint, it's just showing you what the color looks like. And if you flip that little card over, you can see where the paint is actually on the little sheet on the back. Wow, I'm doing a great job at describing this so far. Here you can see a little example of something that I've already done with these paints in my sketchbook, and the colors are crazy vibrant, super saturated, as you can see compared to this little watercolor piece I had done on the previous page. This little bonus pack that was sent to me by Peerless Watercolors has 60 colors in it. Kind of crazy, kind of a lot, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to show you guys some swatches. As I mentioned before, these colors are very, very saturated, and they activate pretty much the same way as a dried watercolor pan would. Just add a little bit of water to the sheet and you've got beautiful transparent color right away. Some of the sheets on the paint side have a really gorgeous texture, which is really fun to observe. I have one of their bonus packs that they sent to me for free, and they actually didn't even ask for a review when they sent me these paints. They just asked if I wanted to try them out, and I of course was very, very excited. If you guys are interested in checking out these paints, I wanted to go ahead and mention that there's a link down in the description where if you order via that link, you'll get a free mystery sheet with your order. So you'll get an extra random color with your order, and I will make a small commission as an affiliate at no extra cost to you. So you guys can check that out if you'd like. It was really nice of them to set that up for me and to, offer something special to you guys. And because this is such an interesting use of watercolors, there's a lot of different ways to use them, and we'll talk about how they differ from more traditional watercolors in a moment. Calling these not traditional doesn't necessarily work because these paints have been around for a long time. Peerless Watercolors has been around since 1885, and you may have seen watercolor sheets by other brands or other companies in the past, but as far as I know, Peerless was the original. This company, this product has been around for a really, really long time, and these sheets are still made the same way now as they were, over 100 years ago. Before we talk about the different ways that you can use these, your brains may already be just overflowing with different applications and ideas. I want to talk about how these vary from traditional, quote-unquote traditional watercolors that you might get in tubes or half pans. These are dye-based paints as opposed to being pigment-based. While the first thing people usually think of when they think of dye-based versus pigment-based is they start to question the light fastness of paints. And in that regard, you could think of these as being similar to the Ecoline liquid watercolors, Dr. P.H. Martin's, the liquid watercolors. Those are all dye-based paints. So these are really similar to those, and Peerless watercolors are available in liquid form as well. I was talking with Dalton, who is the person I've been in contact with via Instagram from this company. He was telling me that these watercolors are often used even in museums for recoloring old photographs and things like that, and how they even have some paintings up around the office that have been there for several years and haven't been fading. I think that we sometimes get overly excited about light fastness things, and we're worried that if we put something up on the wall, it's going to be faded in a week or 2 weeks or 3 months or 3 years. But oftentimes, even if something has a fair light fastness rating, you might not see the fading effects of that for a couple of decades sometimes. Of course, that varies a lot. There are some colors that are much more fugitive than others, and you're always going to have that, whether it's dye-based or pigment-based paints. But if you're really worried, you can limit the use of these to things more like sketchbook studies or practice things. If you're going out plein air painting and you want to have paints that are easy to take with you and you don't want to carry an entire palette, this could be really nice. When looking at these swatches all together, you may notice, especially in the orangey yellow area, that there are some colors that look very similar to one another, and at first you may think that this is a negative, but I want to explain to you why it's kind of not. When working with the Peerless watercolors, if you've got, 24, 48 color set, it's not going to be the same as working with a watercolor set of that many colors, because it's not as easy to have all of those colors out in front of you at once as it is with, you know, dried watercolor pans, for example. With these sheets, because they take up more room and they're flat, I find it's useful to build limited palettes. So I had picked out 5 colors here that I was going to be using for this piece, and if you're going to be working with a limited palette, it's nice to have subtle variations in color for building very customized palettes. So I might want a yellow that's a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler for something specific, and having these colors that just vary from each other slightly is actually really useful for that. I did find that I personally was missing like a nice cool lemon yellow, as that's something I use a lot, and the warmer yellows in this particular set were kind of difficult for me to adjust to, because I do kind of rely on having a cooler yellow for the way I like to mix greens or even oranges and skin tones and things like that. But ultimately it just took a little bit of adjusting, and it was fine, and it was very, very fun. On the Peerless Watercolors website, they list a couple different ways that you can use these paints, and they also kind of stress that you can do whatever you want with them, which is really awesome. One of the ways that they say you can use these that I thought was really interesting was if you have a palette that has small wells in it, like you might normally mix watered down paints in, you could actually just snip off a corner of one of these little watercolor sheets and stick it right in the water, and the color would dissolve and disperse within the water, and then you would have, you know, your paint right there ready to go. I thought that was a really interesting way. You can use it the way I'm doing it, which is kind of treating each individual sheet like a half pan that you're reactivating and using. Or you could even just take strips of the color sheets and adhere them in your sketchbook, whether you want to tape them down or glue the back. And then when you open your sketchbook, you've got some paint right there on your paper and you're ready to go. I like to have my mixing tray because I like to mix the colors a lot. If you're planning to mix them a little bit less, and if you want to just use the colors straight off of the sheets, there's a lot of potential for these watercolors to provide a really nice compact setup. In the very beginning, you may have seen that the one green sheet I got really, really, really wet, just way too wet, and I was worried that the paper would start to disintegrate or fall apart, and it didn't. It was pretty delicate for a little while, but I just left it on its own and let it dry, and it was ready to go. Of course, just like with any watercolors, they are going to run out eventually, so you're going to reach a point where there's not really any paint left to reactivate on the sheets, but that's pretty standard. I found after having used these sheets that there was still, you know, a good amount of paint left on them, well enough to do a few more paintings like this at least. And the one color, the more Payne's Gray Indigo type color that I ended up using, I had used for several other things already. Another thing I found that makes these paints very unique is that they actually lift fairly easily. You may notice in the painting I'm working on, the hair around this character's ear, I had for some reason gone in and done super detailed hair around his ear, like right away, which is not something I normally do. But then when I went to work in and around that area, any wet paint that touched that area I had already worked in, it just reactivated that and I lost that definition. And I'm someone who really, really loves to layer my watercolors. I like to put things on top of one another, and while the paper you're using can definitely affect that, this is Strathmore's 100% cotton. I think this is their hot press paper, but it has much more of a cold press texture in my mind. But the paper that you're using can also make a big impact on how liftable your colors are. So just like with any art supply, if you do intend to check these out, you're going to have to find a combination of supplies that work for you. You'll have to experiment and think about how you want to use these colors. If you want to disperse the color in liquid and use it a little bit more like an ink, which these kind of remind me of being dye-based, or if you want to just grab a couple colors with a palette like I did here, if you want to attach some colors to your sketchbook and carry them with you, the paints are really, really flexible, and I really love that about them. The way the colors spread and reactivate and blend into one another reminds me a lot of inks without that paralyzing fear of not being able to reactivate my color, which is one of the biggest reasons I don't paint with ink more often. The color is really vibrant and very saturated, similar to these, but I always worry that the color is going to stain super quickly when working with ink, which is always what happens. But with these, I'm able to reactivate and blend out my edges if I want to. They definitely do disperse a little differently, a little bit flatter and a little bit more evenly than watercolors. But I definitely think they're worth experimenting with and worth giving a go if you're interested in them. I also wanted to quickly add that talking with the company, the people I've been talking to from Peerless Watercolors, has been one of the most enjoyable professional experiences that I've ever had. Dalton has been really personable and friendly and communicative, and whenever I've had any questions about the paints, he's been there and answered them, and it's just been really, really nice. So if you guys are interested in checking out these watercolors, I would highly recommend it. Please do. I'm really grateful to have gotten to check them out. If you've tried them or anything like them in the past, please do let me know down in the comments, as well as any questions you may have, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!